I don't know if I'm ready for this.
No, it's going to be fine. Got to be somewhat professional. All right, so first up is our keynote, Jim Beechey. If you know Jim or you've never heard him speak before, this will be a great talk. Also, something to know about Jim, he is a leader at where I work, but I like to call him Dad. So if you'd like to call him Dad for the rest of the day, that would be totally cool. Just walk up and be like, "Hi, Dad," give him a high five. I think he'd appreciate that. Oh, a hug, maybe. You want a hug? Everyone hug him.
Quasi-hugger, I guess.
All right, so here's Jim.
Thanks, Matt. So first thing I want to do, kind of kick off, is talk a little bit about, if the clicker will work. There we go. Where we've been at this conference, which is pretty amazing to me. This thing started in 2011, and really humble beginnings. And that's why I'm wearing this shirt today, which was still my favorite con shirt of all time. It was the 2011 shirt. I can't believe it's actually still wearable, given my laundry skills, etc. But this was a really big moment for the community in Michigan to have our own conference here in Detroit. And the folks that kicked this off really started something big when they did BSides and then added Converge. And I think it's been a huge, huge help to the community in a lot of different areas. So I just wanted to pay homage to them a little bit. If you can see, anybody notice what is sort of incongruent or wrong about these two things on here? Anybody with insider knowledge want to speak up? Matt? Yeah, somebody said it. It says Rensen. And this doesn't look like the Rensen. This is like the anti-Rensen, right? So this is actually at Eastern Market. The story goes, they were a little offended by RoboCop. So they sort of voided the registration, I guess they would say, at the Rensen. They weren't quite ready for RoboCop. So instead they did it at Eastern Market, had a group, had about 100, 150 people. This year at this place, we've gone up to like 300 and some. So I want to pay homage to the folks who have put all blood, sweat, and tears into that, and just thank them for a great conference. Okay. All right. So let's get into this talk. Now, I used the 2011 date as a little bit of a primer for thinking about where we are in our industry, where we've gone since 2011. In 2011, we'd already seen the Google Aurora attacks. That was kind of the first big APT moment in our history. Stuxnet was really out there already, so we kind of had those two watershed events. But since then, we've seen a lot of activity. And that was kind of the premise behind this talk, was what have we seen and where are we at and how do we get better? So I won't spend too long on this, but we'll talk through it a little bit. 2012 was really that sort of first anonymous. We started seeing more data breaches. Probably the more interesting one for us is this Zappos one, where we actually learned that if you handle a data breach correctly, it can actually be a competitive advantage. And Zappos was the first example of somebody handling a breach really well. 2013, we sort of got into a different reality. We had Snowden in the middle. The insider threat became the thing everybody worries about, and nobody still can really deal with. If anybody has that solved, I'd love to hear from you. You had APT1 from Mandiant, which was the big public event that said China is the issue, right? Which was a really watershed moment for us. I only included this right here because I thought it was the coolest image ever when I was researching. We're literally dropping DDoS bombs on Iran. I don't know. Obviously, the Target breach, and really that led into 2014, which was the year of the breach. Every retail in North America really realized they had a problem. There were just litany of breaches, massive spending in our industry. And then we also learned that we can name and put logos around our bugs with Heartbleed and Shellshock, and unfortunately, that trend kind of continues. So I would argue things have progressively gotten worse. Unfortunately, we had the big Anthem breach, which probably, I'd imagine 50, 60% of this room was in that breach, your health information, personal information. We had Ashley Madison, which I think was one of the biggest cultural breaches of our time, and frankly did some of the most damage. I mean, countless marriages, unfortunately some suicides. I mean, that was a huge event. In my world, I work in a utility, the first attack that took down an electric grid in Ukraine. I mean, we're changing the game. We're getting out of data breaches, right? We're starting to get into things that actually can impact human life, and that's huge. And then this last year was equally crazy. We had the ransomware thing, which, anybody see what happened yesterday? Small little event. I imagine many of you were on your phones or explaining to bosses why you were okay or why you weren't or whatever. Major ransomware attack. And then, candidly, there was some level of interference from a cyber perspective in our election. I'm not going to say hacking. There was no hacking. But the fact that a nation state showed interest in our election and chose to do some kind of cyber activity to impact it, whether you believe they did or not, that's significant. So all of this sort of continues to crescendo towards we're not doing really well. And that's one of the premises of this talk is we've got a lot of challenges out there. I don't have all the answers by any stretch, but I am going to talk about some things that I think can help us mature as an industry. So at the same time, the job market for InfoSec has exploded. Any one of you in this room can go find a job tomorrow probably making more money. That's just the reality. We are in crazy demand, and I don't care what stat you use, there's just an unbelievable demand. I feel it, I see it, it's out there. So my premise is we perform poorly and we're spoiled. Doesn't really make sense. And it's a weird place to be. I mean, if you really can look back, and I gave you some high watermark examples, but if you look back at the list of breaches, they're everywhere. They're so pervasive. And I would argue, you can sort of point the finger and you can, say, well, that was IT or that was so-and-so or so-and-so clicked on a link. But at the end of the day, I think we have to be accountable for what happens at our organizations. And it's our job to either make sure these things don't happen or minimize the damage when they do. I'm certainly a believer in you can't prevent everything. At the same time, I feel like our industry, candidly, is quite spoiled, and it disappoints me. I don't know if you guys saw the drama on Twitter around DerbyCon, but Dave Kennedy, who puts on probably the best con, no offense guys, in the industry, charges like $125 to go there, and because tickets sell out so fast, people are lambasting him. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it's like, if you think you can do better, then go do it yourself. So I really struggle with some of the reactions that our industry has, and frankly, the attitude that sort of everybody loves to push back, everybody loves to troll, everybody loves to complain. I'm much more a believer in let's try to fix some of these things and see what we can do to help. So what's our path forward? And don't get me wrong, I will never claim that I have all the answers here. And I'm going to talk not at a technical level at all. I'm going to talk much more to macro level. So things that I see in our industry that I believe need to be changed or improved, but they are at a macro level, so I will sort of warn you there. I am emphasizing something, though, that I believe that these are issues that we all must address. These are not issues that leadership needs to address or only our industry luminaries, the people who, we all kind of look up to. I think every one of us can have some impact on some of these, and my challenge to you would be to take one or two, think about it, and see what you can do to help improve things. Don't feel like you got to take on the whole deal, but pick something, maybe make a change or make some improvement in your own organization or your own involvement in the community, and see what you can do to help. Because I really believe these are some of the things that will help us. And I firmly believe that if you handle things, sometimes you just have to handle things on a macro level and start making slow and steady progress towards where you want to be. And candidly, I think the technology pieces will fall into place if we can solve some of these other things. All right, so let's get into a little bit. So technical fundamentals. We have a love of products, we have a love of tools, we have a love of fancy blinky boxes. And in this example, the CISO just spent $1 million on this super cool vendor APT blocker. This is a real ad, by the way. I obviously didn't name the vendor, but it is a real ad. But the org still has default creds, no logs, right? No asset database, no egress filtering, local admin for all. My point here is many of these breaches that we've seen, many of these problems that we've encountered are really the lack of fundamentals. And what I would encourage you as security professionals is to pause and think about whether or not what you are pursuing is really what you should be pursuing. I love tools, I love products, but at the end of the day, if we can't do these kinds of things, I'm not so sure we should be going after the $1 million purchase. Now, I won't claim that all of these are easy. Some of these are very difficult. I work at a major Fortune 500 company. We still are terrible at asset database. Terrible, right? We had a red team exercise done internally a few months back and still found default creds on a system that managed a highly critical, I could argue, our most critical corporate application. It wasn't sort of in the electric grid space, but these things are still out there, and I have a team of 50 plus people, right? So imagine what it's like in some of the environments where you're stretched from a resource standpoint. But the point here is not that, you have to immediately solve all these things, but really focus on these things before you sort of get enamored with the fancy technology. And it's sort of, in that same vein, we're all thinking about the latest O-Day comes out, and we're all excited, and we want to, figure out what it does and protect our organizations, and we don't even know what systems we have to patch. So I just would really encourage you. I think you can have a major impact by focusing on these fundamentals and really show a lot of value, frankly, for almost no cost. Now, there's cultural issues in these. You could argue there's cost in logs, although some of the open source stuff is so amazing these days that, minimal cost. But these are things you can do, and you can have a quantifiable difference in your organization. And you will see breaches that exist because of these things. So fundamentals, 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 and then move forward. And that's really what the CISO would say next. Which I hope some of you get the joke is, this is the hotness right now, is threat hunting. And again, please, fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. Kyle, we'll let you threat hunt a little bit. All right. This one's a little more, controversial maybe. I hope not. But I'm going to make a case that our industry has got to solve our diversity issue if we're really going to get better. And we have one. I hope you realize that. And frankly, if you look around the room, it's pretty easy to tell that. I've learned over the years, and the data shows it. This is, I know the links are hard to see. This is from the Financial Times. If you search for Financial Times Case for Diversity, you'll find this. It's a good article that shows not just a sort of a correlation between diversity and performance of teams, but they're starting to get to a causation of that. And I have seen that sort of anecdotally in my career. I know when I first started, and I was a leader pretty early in my career, probably too early, I used to hire clones of myself, right? And I used to, think, well, that was what I wanted to do because I was pretty good at what I do. So why don't I sort of get a bunch of people that think and work like me, and we'll be great. And what I've learned is you can only be so good at so many things, and you need people in your organization that are way different from you if you're going to really reach that right level of maturity. None of us can be good at everything. And so there's some data here that this study points to around performance, around revenue improvement, performance improvement, innovation, those kinds of things. I couldn't find anything that specifically was InfoSec. I really would love to see that in the future, but I personally believe that's one of our challenges, one of the things we've got to solve, and so I'm making that case for it. But here's our statistics. This is where we stand today. If 50% of the population in a professional workforce capacity is women, 25% are in computing, 11% in InfoSec, right? So we're not even keeping up with IT. Less than 10% African Americans or Hispanics. I mean, it's just not acceptable. It just isn't. Okay? We've got to be better. If you believe that the case for diversity is real and that you can improve your program or we can improve as an industry, these statistics, unfortunately, are pretty alarming. And then the other big issue that we have to fix is the discriminatory issue, which women face remarkably higher than men. And obviously, I don't want to see 15% of men experiencing it either, but 50% is just unbelievable. And I know people will say, well, you know, that's somebody's sort of biased stats or whatever. But I can tell you I've seen it this week, unfortunately. And I'm going to tell you a story about a person who approached the front desk on Thursday and challenged the female who was checking him in that she didn't know anything about a Wi-Fi pineapple that was sitting on the desk. And I'm sorry, that pisses me off. And as an industry, we have to figure out how to frankly stop that. And I'm not saying we got to be macho men and, you know, go take the guy out back or anything like that, but I think we have to figure out how we can pull those people aside and start having a real conversation with them. The fact is, she did know what it was. She does know how to use it. And it's just unacceptable that we continue to see that sort of attitude in our industry. And we saw it here at a great place. And I'm not disparaging this conference. It's a wonderful place with wonderful volunteers and great people. But we saw it here on Thursday. So we've got to do better. But I won't just complain, I promise you. I'll try to give you some thoughts that I think will help. And again, I by no means am an expert here. My sister, who's like a PhD in gender studies, wouldn't believe that I'm actually talking about this. But some things that I think we can do. I do firmly believe you have to hire the best candidate, okay? When you're hiring, you do. You should. That should be your mantra. But there are things you can do to make sure that you are actively looking and understanding sort of what your biases are. And this is kind of this first bullet. Is that one of the things you can do is recognize and adjust for your bias. I mentioned this earlier. What do you think my bias would be? Right? Anybody got any examples? Any thoughts? Canadians, yes. I'm a Canadian, although became a U.S. citizen. So yeah, it's true. He's not lying, especially Western Canadians, not this Ontario stuff. I mean, my wife could probably answer it, who's here, but like middle-aged white guys that like sports, I mean, it's natural for me to easily connect with someone who is similar to me. And bias isn't always a bad thing, it's just who you are. But you have to recognize that and sort of force yourself out of that place. And the biggest thing is recognizing it. So time, dollars, support for diverse groups. And this is not something where you have to write a $10,000 check. You can have the simplest of actions that can help out. I will tell you that there are multiple universities in this area. Many of them, one that I spend some time with, Eastern Michigan, they have a Women in Information Assurance group. If you just go talk to that group, if you give them tickets to Converge, right? It's easy stuff. Engage them in dialogue. Make sure they're comfortable here. Make sure they meet people. Introduce them to people. You can have an impact. You don't have to create some kind of crazy program that costs you $1 million. Then the other thing, I mentioned this earlier about hiring clones of yourself. You really need to think about hiring for your weaknesses. You have to know what they are, but you have to hire for them, and that will naturally create some diversity in your team. Give you a personal example. I'm a terrible negotiator. I hate it. If I have to go buy a used car, she's nodding way too much back there. I hate it. So I don't like doing it. So I know that I have to have people in my team that are really good, really good negotiators. That's just one example. I'm not a detail person. I'm the kind of the idea guy, and if somebody's going to execute down to the nth degree, I'm going to need help with that. That's not my skill set. So think about what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then hire accordingly. It can really make a great difference in your team. So that's kind of the leader perspective. But for individuals, simply working and building your network outside of your comfort zone can make a big difference. Not just for you personally, but for whoever that individual is you're connecting with. Most of you here today know some people here. I really encourage you to go meet someone you don't know. And just network and talk to people and gain that perspective. It's amazing how quickly you can become friends or can become, we all have sort of this common theme of being here, being security professionals. So it's easy to find that common ground. And so go look for people outside of that sort of normal comfort zone for you. And then if there's anything you can really do as an individual is mentorship. And mentorship can occur at any level, okay? I don't know if I think he's here somewhere, but one of our folks who's kind of a first, second year employee, I saw him the other day mentoring somebody who came to the conference who's a college student and thinking about cybersecurity. My point being, there's always another level that you can help with. There are junior high programs, there's Digital Divas at Eastern Michigan, there's all kinds of STEM programs that you can get engaged in and help people no matter where you're at in your career. So really would encourage individuals to do that. The other thing, I guess, I was trying to decide how much I would rant, but I'm going to say it. Guys, just because a woman talks to you at a conference doesn't mean that she wants you to try to sleep with her or date her or whatever. We laugh, but it's unfortunately very true. There's always that balance when you're trying to connect with people and meet new people, but I know way too many females in this industry that are amazingly talented, that are just frankly tired of going to conferences and having to sort of push people away. That shouldn't be what we are doing here. If there is really a connection and you actually exchange numbers and you go on a date, whatever, that's cool, but I feel that there's a bit of that target mentality when we're at these things, and I think we all have to adjust our style and our perspective for that, and understand that is not why they're here. That is not why women are here, and frankly, let's do that another place and time. So I would just challenge you, and I know this is a tough sort of delicate balance back and forth, but I'd really challenge you to think about that, and candidly, to look out for people who are here that may or may not be experiencing that. And I say that here, but I really mean it in the greater community, because we need to encourage more people to feel comfortable and be here and be a part of this experience. All right, let's get to something else. Those who know me know that metrics and measurement had to be on this talk, as half my team chuckles. We need to work at how do we measure what we do and what success is. And these are some examples from other industries of performance measures that have stood the test of time, that are well-known, well-trusted, well-respected. I have a ratio from a stock perspective, loss ratio for insurance. The one on the left is specific to utility industry, SAFE, I can't even say it. And these are sort of standard industry metrics and measures that everybody uses, that everybody knows, that everybody talks about. So the challenge I have is sort of, what are ours? I mean, really, does anybody have any thoughts? This is something, I feel like we have metrics, okay? So there are lots of metrics out there. There's lots of suggestions for what metrics we should or should not use. But we really don't have standards for those metrics. What is the right amount of patching? What's acceptable, what's normal, what's average, what's not? How many missing patches per workstation is acceptable? This room would say 0, right? And then they go work at any enterprise, and it's like 25. I mean, seriously. So what is the target? What is the standard? We really struggle with that. If we can agree on a metric, then how do we set that standard? And then which of these metrics are truly key performance indicators? That's what KPI is. So what would we say is a real gauge of our program and its success? I'm not as easy at all. I've actually been thinking about working on this for kind of the last 2 years, and we've had our ups and downs. You know, we started with like 50 metrics, and we're going to go crazy, and then we sort of narrowed it down. And this is something that I want to keep working on, but I think as an industry, we all have some opportunity to try to improve this, because it is something we're struggling with. So I just, bottom line for me, this has got to change. If we're going to reach the level of professionalism of other industries, we've got to try to figure out how to solve this. So some examples, please just don't. And Wendy mentioned this in her talk yesterday, Wendy Nather. I want to end I have 100 million attacks a day. If I do one thing in my career, it will be to end that metric. It is the dumbest thing you can ever do. It's literally firewall denies. Executives love it, but the reality is it means nothing. Her analogy was it's raindrops on an umbrella, which I thought was a fantastic analogy. Incident counts, workstation reimage, compliance violations, vulnerability counts. Some of you might challenge me on that one. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I don't think that these sort of big number, we have 133,000 vulnerabilities. I just don't think that does anybody any good. So what I think metrics should be is first and foremost, they should be informative to help somebody make a decision or take action. If they don't have that sort of characteristic about them, then I think something's got to change. Incentivize the behavior you want, and this is the one that will derail you quickly. The minute you start measuring things and encourage people, somebody's laughing and clapping. I heard your talk yesterday, right? You have to be very careful, because you may incentivize behavior that you don't want. And we're still wrestling with this in a big way, especially around phishing click rates and things like that. The executives want to be punitive, right? And I'm saying, please, no, we don't want to do that. We want to incentivize reporting. Or, yes, we don't want, Sally clicking on 7 out of 8 phishing emails, but I'm not sure that putting that in her performance evaluation is really going to be the answer. So be very careful about this, and think hard before you put something out there. And then speak in the language of your audience. The vulnerability example is one that I use a lot, because it drives me crazy. If you're providing a report to your sysadmins, don't tell them how many vulnerabilities. Tell them how many patches are missing. Because then they can actually take action and do something. Right? You're not just telling them how bad things are, but you're actually going to tell them what they could do to impact that number. We all know one patch can have, a bunch of vulnerabilities. So calculating or counting in that works for us, and maybe you want to see that on your security dashboard, but your audience, if you're trying to impact a change, really needs to see it in the context of theirs. So these are ones I like. I'd certainly be open to discussion and pushback. This, again, I said this is a big thing for me in trying to figure out what the right metrics are for us in our organization, and I hope to share a little more broadly. Maybe we'll do a talk on this next year, but I'm a big fan of the incident metrics, kind of the mean time to detect, recover, react. I will tell you, mean time to detect is probably our biggest metric that we are focusing on. The average time between when a compromise actually occurs and when you can detect it. Not only because we all know that these attacks are not happening sort of at the speed of light. For someone to actually complete their objective, it's taking them typically months. So if you can stop them sooner, that you can win, candidly. So I really like these. These aren't easy, though. You have to have a mature program in order to actually go back and tell when that initial compromise occurred, right? So you're not simply getting an alert and then sort of whacking the machine and reimaging it. You're actually doing some forensics and figuring out when that machine was compromised. So it does take some effort. I mentioned already, I like the average missing patches. And when I say missing patches, I don't mean in total. I like to give it kind of in average, and obviously you can get down to business units, you can put pressure on different areas of maybe your Windows servers are better than your Linux machines, those kinds of things. Simple one, percentage of laptops encrypted. I got to imagine all of us are doing laptop encryption these days. I challenge you to go and verify what your percentage of your laptops encrypted are. Again, there's some chuckling in the room. One of the things you got to be very careful in your metrics is what and how are you collecting them, and sort of can you defend the number. If you're getting the number from the encryption console, your number is going to be pretty good, right? If you're doing it through some other third-party mechanism, the number might not be so good. Personal example, that's kind of why we're chuckling about this. We kind of had a wake-up call recently, sort of in this vein. And so that one of the points of this metrics discussion is you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, whatever instrumentation you have to evaluate, to collect this data, it has to be, it's almost like a SOX thing. It has to be sort of a segregation of duties where you can trust it, and that whatever the source is, it's not biased because it's sort of directly involved. So just a little rant there. Another big one for us as an improvement metrics is working on how many service accounts are managed. We mean managed by like a password vault, those kinds of technologies. And I mentioned phishing click and report rates. Really delicate one here that I wouldn't say we figured out, but we're trying to figure out what the right balance is and what actions we should take, because we do run regular phishing tests. We do have 2 years worth of data. We have seen dramatic improvement organizationally, but what do you do for those folks who just can't quite get there? And again, I'm not sort of advocating for punitive. I'm getting a lot of pressure from folks to talk a little bit more about who's reporting it, because obviously the ability for us to respond quickly is key. And if we are getting people to report them, then we're much better off. So just some examples of things I like. I would love, if you want to, if you have a metric you think is great, I would love to hear from you. So happy to share more, and something I think we all as an industry really need to focus on is how do we get to that professional level that you see in the insurance industry, in retail, in financials. We're just not there yet. Part of that is just our youth of our industry, but I think we've got some work to do. Okay, another big one that I'm really passionate about is communications. And I do believe we have a failure to communicate a lot of times in this industry. And really, what I mean by that is our language that we use these last 3 days just isn't sufficient for our organization. People are not, just frankly, they're not at our level. So they need to hear things from us in a different way. And I'm going to have some suggestions here on what I think we should do from a communication standpoint. So number one is you have to have integrity. The minute you lose it, you're done. Because at some point, the topics that we discuss are so foreign sometimes to folks in our companies that the minute they lose that trust, the next time you're there, you've just lost them. So above all else, keep your integrity, be honest, watch the FUD, but really it's all about keeping that integrity. If you get caught sort of over-exaggerating or, heaven forbid, lying, you're really going to have a hard time regaining that trust from people. I know, talk to mom, that's a weird one. I use this as a gauge for when I'm talking to non-technical audiences. If I can explain it to my mom, then I'm good. I go to the board of directors of our company twice a year to talk cybersecurity. These are people who are typically 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They have retired from industry. They were amazing at what they did. They never had to deal with this stuff. So my gauge for them is if I can explain it to my mom, who's a retired first grade teacher, still doesn't text, doesn't have a smartphone, she wanted another flip phone. You know how hard it was to find a flip phone? And I mean this. I mean, this is really the gauge. And I don't mean it to be disparaging. I love my mom. She's the best. But that's the level you have to think about explaining these things in. And you need to practice it at that level. Less is more. We all love to talk. We all want to explain everything in great amounts of detail because we have justification, because we know when somebody clicked the link, and we know the forensic artifacts, and we know that I scanned and converted the shell bags, and everything is amazing, and look at this report. And your management's like, so you found the compromise on Monday, right? That's what they want to know. Less is more, and the faster, or the more you go up the chain of leadership, the more critical this is. If you're talking to your SOC manager, yes, give them all the detail in the world. If you're talking to your security director, sure, a little more. The minute you get into sort of the C-level executives, they want to know things quick. There is nothing wrong with answering the question yes or no. It's sort of not in our human condition, it feels like sometimes. You know, you guys have been in these meetings, but there is nothing wrong with answering yes or no. Now, I think this is a really important one, to flex your confidence level. We all naturally have a tendency to talk either authoritatively or sort of passively. We kind of, by nature, usually, most of us have that in our personality. What I like to see from people is to be able to flex that based upon the facts or the data they have. So if you really are certain, you have data to back it up, you are very confident, there's nothing wrong with showing that assertiveness. If, on the other hand, you're not so sure, you really should share that. You really should say, hey, I've got 60% confidence in this. This is sort of my assertion at this point. And I see a lot of people who struggle because they can't flex their confidence level in that way. And it's really, really important to get accuracy. And especially in our domain, I mean, anybody who's done any incident response work knows that the narrative and the story can change so dramatically day to day to day. Unless you're certain, you can kind of take your organization or take your executives on a bit of a wild ride if you're not careful. And then one of the things I like people to have is an analogy catalog. And what I mean by that is, if you're a subject matter expert and you're trying to talk to mom, a lot of times you need to have analogies that they can relate to. The Wendy's I mentioned yesterday with the firewall denies was sort of bubbles on an umbrella or raindrops on an umbrella is a great example. I like to use there's sort of knocks at the door, or a firewall deny is like somebody driving their car past our building on the road, right? That's about how important it is if you were to compare it to a physical security scenario. So think about, if you're a subject matter expert, no matter what you do, you need to have those analogies so that you can explain highly technical issues in a sort of in lay terms, if you will. And practice. This isn't something any of us are born with. It's actually quite foreign to most of us. It takes a lot of time and effort. If you know that you're going to be presenting to this kind of an audience that may not speak the same language, I don't think you necessarily need to practice your talk as much as you need to prepare and think about the language you're using. Big help there. All right, final one. We're on the home stretch. And then you guys can get to some technical talks. I know you're excited about that. I call this the leadership analyst chasm. And what I mean by that is I talk to a lot of security professionals. My tendency, I like the technical stuff, so I kind of lean that way a little bit. But I see that there's a great gap between leadership and the folks who are actually doing the technical work in our industry. And I think that gap is causing a lot of harm in many organizations, and I think it's something that both of us need to kind of come to the middle and figure out. As a leader in an InfoSec organization, this is something I think about a ton. Because if there is this chasm between the two groups, I'm going to have employees that aren't engaged. Frankly, I'm going to have folks that are more likely to leave, that are more likely to not be interested. And I do believe this is a two-way street, things that both areas can sort of help to improve. But it is significant, and I don't have sort of statistically significant evidence here, but the more I talk to people, the more I hear about how frustrated and kind of struggling they are with their leadership. So some suggestions. This is a simple and easy one, but it's all too common to not occur, is to spend actual and real time together. If your CISO hasn't been in your SOC in, a month, that's probably an issue. At the same time, if you haven't sort of made the effort to go talk to that person or, invite them to lunch or tried to have some conversations, it works both ways. So for leaders, I would really encourage you to work on your technical game. There's nothing more frustrating for a technical person than having a leader who really doesn't understand what they're doing, but more importantly, continues to question it. I think it drives technical people crazy. You can't know everything as a leader, but you have to be able to talk the talk to a certain level. And if you're going to choose to sort of be non-technical, then you're going to have to trust a whole heck of a lot more. And you're going to have to let your leaders or your technical people, you're going to really have to let them go. So it's kind of a balance between those two things. But work on your technical game. This is a big one for me. Anybody knows for me? I hate the dress for the job you want. I absolutely despise it. I think it's the bane of corporate America. So dress not for the job you want, but the team you want to have. And it's funny, if you go into organizations or even you look at pictures, you look at, you've got the CISO who's, in the suit and, defending the enterprise, right? And you've got the analysts who literally are in hoodies and want to be hackers all day and don't talk to me and I might not even have a face. So I really think this matters. Providing the environment that your people are comfortable with, I think can have a significant help. Analysts, measure what you do. We talked about this already. Help your boss by measuring what you're doing. Even if it means that you're going to your boss and saying, you know what, we screwed this thing up. We're not as good as we thought we are. Really, really important. It's not okay to just say, hey, we're good, I got this. You should have to defend yourself. If you're asking for that $1 million blinky box, it's okay that your boss really wants to have some detail there, wants to have some business justification, wants to have a case. You shouldn't sort of be blanket trusted. You got to come to the middle a little bit on this stuff as well. And then help your leaders market your team or sort of the value they create. Whether we like it or not, our industry still is a bit of a mystery to most people, and we have to market ourselves within our organizations. You should be marketing your team outside your organization to attract the right talent, but marketing yourself within your organization is a significant help as well. And if you can help your leader do that, your team will be much more successful. Budget will follow, corporate culture and attitudes will change. It's amazing what you can do when you work on the cultural aspect of this in your corporation, to not be the team of no, but trying to actually engage with people. So helping your boss do that, I think, is a significant one. So I'm going to wrap up there, give you a little time back. I do want to say there are some amazing talks today. I really would encourage you to dig deep and kind of focus on the technical details you're going to see today. This talk obviously wasn't focused there, but some amazing talks from amazing people. If you don't know Jay Radcliffe, he's going to be talking today. He's like one of the best red team people, frankly, in the world. He's a Michigan guy, so it's pretty awesome that he's here today. I met, I'm going to butcher his name, so I won't say his last name, Nate and Adam, who are doing the logs talk later. I think it's at like 2 o'clock. They are like, if you're blue team, you've got to be in that talk. They focus on Windows logs, which is still a mystery to many of us. So I just would encourage you to enjoy the day, have a great time, take care of each other, and with that, I'll certainly answer any questions you have on the talk. Thank you. Any questions? No, it's early for a Saturday. Yeah.
So you mentioned going out to lunch with, spend real time with people.
Yeah.
As an information security professional, I'm stereotypical, right? I'm an introvert. I'm head down on my keyboard, I get with blind spot and everything else, right? So when I go out and talk to somebody in restaurant tea or a nice way to have lunch,
Right.
should I be talking to them about work stuff or about other stuff? Or, I mean,
Okay, great question. So the question was, I'll repeat it for the, basically security nerds, right? We're a bunch of introverts typically. If you're going to go out to lunch with somebody, if you're going to take that leap, should I be talking to them about work stuff? Should I be talking about life, personal stuff, that kind of thing? It's a great question from Jeremy. I guess my sort of bias is I tend towards a little bit of the personal stuff with my own people, because I do want to know what's going on and what's important in their life. Now, the conversation tends to trickle back to work most times, right? Because, they've got some time, they've got some frustrations. When I'm meeting with folks outside, I actually tend to focus a little bit more on work. I'll be honest with you, especially if you're in a gender situation, right? You don't want to be, you got to watch those lines a little bit. But I tend to focus a little bit more on work and maybe how, understanding what their issues are, what they're going through, maybe how we can help, those kinds of things. So I guess it's a bit of both, Jeremy, but my own team, I really do want to kind of figure out what's going on, what's at issue, or what's sort of making them tick. Does that make sense? Good question. Anybody else? Yeah, Wolf.
I'll give you one. I liked your point about analysts equipping leaders with good stories, right? Because as a leader, you want to tout the great things your people did. And so oftentimes, to them, it's just like, oh yeah, we almost got hit by this wide ransom. But we stopped it. Oh yeah, there's this big attack coming on, but we stopped it. And being able to get that sort of leader so he can tout the benefits of his team is sometimes can be kind of hard. Do you have a success story where one of your guys did something, it didn't necessarily seem like a big deal to them, but when you and them got together, you realized the importance of it?
Yeah, a couple examples. I'll give you two. I'll give you one that's cultural. Our team, we attended, Merit Network ran a conference, I think they still do, called MCRCon, and turns out that they had a CTF, and a bunch of our people entered it, and they ended up getting like first through fifth place. Like, they totally swept it. And I was like, they were like, yeah, it was like, we did well. They didn't want to brag or whatever. I'm like, this is awesome, right? You guys rock. And I put it in an update up the chain, and it ended up just going up. I mean, it literally ended at the CEO's update. And the amount of cultural benefit we got from that, I mean, we had like vice presidents high-fiving people in the hallways. You got a bunch of criminals working for you. It's awesome. This is so cool that they're here. I mean, I'm like, you run generation plants, and you're like high-fiving me for these hackers. So that was a really fun couple of days, and we got a lot of mileage out of that. Gosh, now I was thinking of the other one, Wolf. The other one that's really more sort of tactical, pragmatic. There was a sort of there was kind of a warning about some attacks against web-based content management systems, and it came out of one of the ISACs that said, hey, we're seeing a little bit of activity, and we had an analyst who took it upon himself to write a little rule in the F5 to just say, look, if I see this, I can block it. And actually 6 months later, we saw in the wild those attacks broadly used, and we were actually able to show that someone attempted to exploit our system, which, by the way, of course, couldn't be patched because we were in the middle of a project to upgrade it, and it's going to take 6 months, and you guys have heard this story 1,000 times. But we were able to quantifiably show how we stopped an exploit that would have literally, the project would have been off the rails, we would have been formatting like our production web servers, that kind of stuff. So that I could send up the chain and say, look, we don't get a lot of these opportunities, but this is actually a quantifiable prevention occurrence. And we sort of gauged a little bit like what we thought it would cost. But it wasn't a process that we had in place that sort of took care of it. It was the actions of an individual. And if that person wouldn't have told me, and if someone else wouldn't have said, hey, we saw this alert, probably would have never known about it. So, a couple examples. Great question. I know we're running on time. Anything else real quick? If not, I'm happy to have conversations out in the hallway throughout the day. Thanks for your time today. Early morning on a Saturday is not the easiest thing for us, so thank you.